Now that the NFL regular season is over, Black Monday has come and gone, but it's still carrying on in terms of teams making their decisions, in terms of whether they're going to fire their head coaches, fire their general managers, keep them for 2025, yada, yada, yada. We know the drill every year. And a couple of telltale signs that you have for a really poorly run organization are, number one, how frequently and consistently are they ending up with draft picks in the top 10 or the top 5? The more that occurs, the more you know you've got a crappy organization. Also, how often is that team looking for a new head coach and or general manager? If it's 3 years or less on average, you've got a shitty organization. And there are certainly some shitty organizations on display. My Bears certainly fall into that mix for sure. But the crappy one that I'm choosing to talk about first here is the Jacksonville Jaguars. Because this is a shitty organization. Bottom 5 of the league, bar none, period. They made the decision after what was certainly to them a disappointing season to fire Doug Pederson and send him packing after 3 seasons there in Duval. And you know what? Look, I will fully acknowledge that I was a supporter of this Doug Pederson hire for the Jags after the 2021 season. There's a lot of context there, right? The Urban Meyer disaster of 2021 where he didn't even make it through the full year. You have Trevor Lawrence. You need some stability. You want somebody that understands offensive football and quarterback play and can be a mentor and a guide for a young quarterback. And that's what Doug Pederson was. Here was a guy that came available on the market. He had won a Super Bowl in Philadelphia. No matter how much anybody tries to dismiss that or undercut that, you know, the list of head coaches that have won Super Bowls is a pretty small list overall. Doug Pederson is part of that fraternity. So when you have the opportunity like that to bring in a guy with NFL head coaching experience who actually won a Lombardi trophy, showed some capability of working with a young quarterback like he did in Philly with Carson Wentz, who, if you remember, I know it's a long time ago, but in 2017, Carson Wentz was playing that year at an MVP type of level before he tore up his knee. Crazy as that sounds, here's the reality. Doug Pederson, no matter who else you want to talk about on his staff you think was really involved with that, at the end of the day, he oversaw that entire ship. They won the fucking Super Bowl under him. So for Jacksonville to come in, especially after the disaster that was Urban Meyer, and say, hey, we can bring Doug Pederson in the fold, it made a shit ton of sense. Certainly perhaps some concerns about why this might not work, but there are also reasons to think that this could work, and initially it did. He comes in that first year. The Jags the year before in 2021 were 3-14. He comes in 2022, they're 9-8, and they win the division, they make the playoffs, and they win a playoff game, if you remember. They were even somewhat competitive against the Chiefs in the divisional round, if memory serves me correctly. Like a pretty good first season there. Then you come back in 2023, same 9-8 record. Granted, they didn't make the playoffs, but, you know, not a huge reason for panic. The bottom, unfortunately, kind of fell out for the Jags here in 2024. Trevor Lawrence was in and out due to injury, a lot of out. That certainly didn't help. Other injuries, you know, a lot of different things at play there. So, he's sent packing, and you know what? I understand it. I won't say I fully disagree with it. I won't say I fully agree with it. But I think the Jags did what they had to do here, because it's one thing if Jacksonville this year was beset by injuries and 4-13, but they were playing really hard and all their games are competitive and they were losing just by this much or some fluke stupid thing. That's one thing. But there were performances where this team just flat out fell on their faces, shit the bed, did not put forth any effort at all. That Detroit performance most notably. I'm surprised Pederson wasn't fired after that. Like at some point in time, you have to get to a place where you say enough is enough. And there's not enough on the good side in the kind of Rolodex to balance out the bad. Doug Pederson had to go. Jacksonville, in this case, made the right call. However, while I will both acknowledge I supported this hiring 3 years ago and now actually support this firing, what I cannot understand for the life of me is why they didn't fire the general manager, Trent Baalke. How in the fuck does Trent Baalke continue to be a goddamn thing in NFL front offices and organizations as a general manager? This is the same guy that ultimately led to pushing fucking Jim Harbaugh out the door, hired Jim Tomsula, blah, 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 in San Francisco. It was a fucking disaster there. A few years later, he pulls the same shit basically he did in San Francisco, where he kind of comes through the back door and politics his way, positions himself, gets the boss fired or whatever. Now he comes in and he's Jacksonville's general manager. He hires Urban Meyer, which is a complete and utter fucking disaster. Even if you don't anticipate it's going to go that badly, at the end of the day, there has to be accountability for that. He was given a second chance to hire a head coach. He hired Doug Pederson, and now 3 years later, his second head coaching hire has been fired. Help me understand how this makes any fucking sense. A general manager who hired Urban Meyer went 3-14 that year, hires Doug Pederson, and 3 years later is firing him after a 4-13 season. Trent Baalke's the general manager, and Trent Baalke now is going to be able to be involved with hiring a third NFL head coach? What the fuck type of sense does this make? Especially when you find out that Shad Khan is saying that Trent Baalke will still be there as the general manager, but the head coach that they hire will report directly to him. Just no! This is not how this shit is supposed to fucking work. You hire a head coach, hopefully typically hired by the general manager to ensure there's some type of synergy there. You've got them on the same type of clock. The head coach reports to the general manager, who reports to a team president, who reports to the board or the fucking owner. There's a vertical structure in place typically for a fucking reason. It's like if you're in a business and you're, let's say, a frontline operational manager, and you've got like department managers and you've got directors. Basically what you're thinking about here is you're taking a frontline manager or maybe a department manager, depending on how you want to look at it, and based off of Sean Codd's logic, you're having them report to the fucking CEO of a large corporation. That doesn't make any fucking sense. That's stupid. You don't do it that way for a fucking reason. Sometimes you could say, just because things have always been done that way doesn't mean it's right, and that's true. However, sometimes it's done a certain fucking way because it's the most logical, sensible way to run a fucking business. And then to sit there, you're on a Zoom call, and they ask you about head coaching candidates, and what if they don't like the general manager? You basically talk about, well, if the head coach wants Trent Baalke gone, he'll fucking be gone. Like, what the fuck are you doing here? Like, I will say this. I do think Shad Khan actually gives a shit about winning. I think he legitimately does care. He's not a Nepo baby per se. He earned his billions, right? He didn't inherit it from his family. He didn't get handed the reins to a franchise. Like, he bought that shit himself. It's his shit. He earned that shit. And you could tell, like, he cares. Caring is one thing, though. Effort and trying is one thing. Ultimately, though, you have to have confidence and ability and execution. And he doesn't have any of that fucking shit. The NFL is not about participation trophies here. It's about hoisting Lombardi trophies. And this shit is fucking dumb, stupid, ridiculous. You hired Urban Meyer. That didn't even last 1 year. You hired Doug Pederson, who's previously won a Super Bowl in his last location, comes here and the best he could do is 9-8. Did Doug Pederson get that much worse, or does your organization just fucking suck? Maybe it's a bit of both, right? But you're going to sit there and give Trent Baalke yet another opportunity to be involved in the hiring of a head coach. Why in the fuck would you do that? And why would you set yourself up in a situation where a head coach is supposed to, on the one hand, in theory, work with the general manager when it comes to the draft, when it comes to roster construction. But on the other hand, if he doesn't like what the general manager says, he could just sit there and go with a straight pipeline directly to the fucking owner. That's open door my ass. That is stupid. Because all that's going to lead to is an environment where the head coach is trying to undercut the general manager. The head coach is potentially trying to position themselves to get the general manager fired so they can take over more of the personnel control and personnel power. And frankly, if you're head coach in this situation and your punishment for taking this precious job, which is an NFL head coach, of which there are only 32 such roles in the damn league, Your penance is you have to work with Trent Baalke. What did you spend every fucking day trying to figure out how to undercut and fire Trent Baalke so you could take as much of his power and responsibility as you possibly could? I mean, come the fuck on here. And meanwhile, what would a Trent Baalke do? He would go to a Shad Khan, since he would be reporting to Shad Khan, and trying to undercut his head coach. This is a fucking recipe for disaster. You just don't do that. Fire Doug Pederson, fine. The next move, or the move before that, based off of merit here, is you should have fired Trent fucking Baalke. Because if the head coach was bad in the mistake, what does that say about the general manager who hired the last two mistakes? If you think the roster was underperforming because of the head coach, well, who's the guy who built the underperforming roster for the underperforming head coach? Jacksonville is one of those situations where every few years they stumble fuck into somewhat of a decent season. But ultimately, they level out to the mean. And the mean for them is they are a third-rate NFL organization run by an ownership group and an owner that doesn't know what the fuck they're doing. And the results show that. And I feel bad for Jags fans in a way because I understand this feeling. Unlike the Bears, where it's a Nepo baby system. The McCaskies inherited it from Papa Bear, and it runs down through that incompetent, nincompoop Nepo family. Your owner actually bought into it. But a lot of the shit is still the same. And it's not going to get any better. Hate to tell you. I can't imagine any Jacksonville fan feeling good about the fact right now that Trent Baalke is still the fucking general manager. That might be okay with Doug Pederson being fired. I'm probably happy about that and saying, well, it should have happened a while ago, and they might be right. But Pederson wasn't the biggest problem here. And until Shad Khan realizes what his biggest problem was here, none of this shit is going to change in Jacksonville. Technically, the biggest problem is him. But unless he's going to sell the team, the next biggest problem is the general manager. He continues to give unmerited, undeserved power and free reign to tear his organization down to the fucking studs and ground. And that's what the hell you've got in Trent Baalke. I can't fucking believe it. It's 2025, and I'm still talking about how the fuck does Trent Baalke still have the ability to be a general manager in the NFL. It's unbelievable.